The Galactic Academy's xenobiology lecture hall buzzed with the nervous energy of students who'd heard whispers about today's topic. Professor Grimbach stood at the front of the amphitheater, his scaled hide gleaming under the artificial lighting as he adjusted his translator collar. The reptilian educator had seen enough in his 2 centuries of teaching to know that some lessons required extra emphasis. Today, he began, his voice carrying the weight of hard-earned wisdom. We discuss the creatures that even seasoned space marines cross star systems to avoid. Valeria Hunt slouched in her seat near the back, one eyebrow raised in that perpetual expression of skeptical amusement that had become her trademark among the other students. The human exchange student had a reputation for asking uncomfortable questions and making observations that left her professors either laughing or reaching for their emergency tranquilizers. Around her, the usual suspects had gathered. Kixmoth, whose crystalline body refracted the lecture hall's light into dancing rainbows across the walls. Nulbex, contained within their environmental suit as a swirling mass of sentient gas that occasionally formed what might charitably be called facial expressions. And Hextar, the insectoid, whose compound eyes never seemed to blink as she took meticulous notes with her 4 writing appendages. The fang cubs of Mortis Prime, Grimbach continued, activating the holographic display behind him. The image that materialized would have sent most sentient beings reaching for the nearest exit. A creature roughly the size of an earth wolf, but built like a nightmare. Midnight black fur covered a muscular frame, while eyes that glowed like molten amber fixed the viewer with predatory intelligence. The creature's maw hung open, revealing teeth that could have been forged in the fires of damnation itself. The classroom fell silent. Even Nulbex's gaseous form stopped swirling. These, the professor said, with the kind of dramatic pause that suggested he'd practiced it in front of a mirror, are the juveniles. A collective shudder ran through the assembled students, all except Val, who squinted at the hologram with the expression of someone trying to solve a particularly interesting puzzle. The adult fang beasts of Mortis Prime, Grimbach continued, clearly enjoying the terror he was inspiring, stand 3 meters at the shoulder and possess jaw strength capable of crushing starship hull plating. Their cubs, however, are considered far more dangerous. Hextar's mandibles clicked nervously. More dangerous than the adults, Professor? Indeed. Adult fang beasts are territorial and predictable. They establish hunting grounds and rarely venture beyond them. The cubs, however— He paused again, letting the suspense build. The cubs are curious. The word hung in the air like a death sentence. Curious creatures, Grimbach explained, are the bane of every xenobiologist's existence. They investigate. They follow. They ... He gestured at the hologram, which shifted to show archival footage of a research station that looked like it had been fed through a particularly violent blender. They play. Val raised her hand, a gesture that immediately caused every other student to tense. Professor Grimbach had learned to approach her questions with the same caution one might reserve for diffusing antimatter bombs. Yes, Miss Hunt? So, she said, leaning back in her chair with that infuriating grin that suggested she was about to say something that would give everyone present nightmares. They're basically like angry chihuahuas, with better dental work. The silence that followed was so complete that the life support systems seemed to hold their breath. Miss Hunt, Grimbach said carefully, these creatures have been responsible for the destruction of no fewer than 12 research expeditions. Their bite force exceeds that of most industrial construction equipment. They can track prey across solar systems using scent trails that remain viable for standard months. And you're comparing them to… What exactly is a chihuahua? Small earth canine, Val replied cheerfully. About this big. She held her hands apart to indicate something roughly the size of a large sandwich, bred primarily to be tiny balls of barely contained rage. They compensate for their size by convincing themselves they're actually dire wolves. Bite anything that moves, including their owners. Totally fearless, completely irrational, and absolutely convinced they can take on creatures 20 times their size. Kixmoth's crystalline structure chimed with what might have been nervous laughter. You're suggesting these apex predators are small and yappy? Oh no, Val said, warming to her theme. I'm suggesting they're probably the galactic equivalent of puppies who don't know they're supposed to be cute instead of terrifying. Professor Grimbach's scaled brow furrowed. In all his years of teaching, he'd never had a student respond to the Fang Cub lecture with anthropomorphic speculation. Most species had the good sense to be appropriately horrified. Miss Hunt, he said slowly, these creatures are not puppies. They are apex predators capable of reducing a full-grown Zelkarian battle trooper to component molecules in under 30 seconds. Right. But have you ever tried giving them belly rubs? The question landed in the lecture hall like a small but potent explosive device. Several students made choking sounds. Nullbex's gaseous form actually condensed into what looked suspiciously like a question mark. I beg your pardon? Belly rubs, Val repeated, as if this were the most reasonable suggestion in the galaxy. Scratches behind the ears. Maybe a nice game of fetch. You know, standard puppy protocols. Hextar's compound eyes focused on Val with the intensity of someone watching a traffic accident in slow motion. You want to play fetch with creatures that eat. Starship hulls for entertainment. I want to know if anyone's ever tried treating them like what they actually are instead of what they look like, Val replied. I mean, you keep calling them cubs. That implies pack behavior, social structure, probably some kind of parental attachment and play instinct. But everyone's so focused on the teeth that they're missing the forest for the trees. Professor Grimbach felt a headache building behind his orbital ridges. This was exactly the kind of thinking that got xenobiologists killed in spectacularly messy ways. It was also, he was forced to admit, exactly the kind of thinking that occasionally led to breakthrough discoveries. Miss Hunt, he said with the weary tone of an educator who had seen too many bright students become cautionary tales, your species' tendency to anthropomorphize dangerous fauna is well documented. It's also well documented that this tendency has a mortality rate that should terrify any rational being. Sure, Val agreed easily, but it's also gotten us some pretty amazing friendships. Dogs used to be wolves. Cats used to be… Well, cats are still basically tiny tigers. But my point stands. Horses, cattle, even some of the more cooperative reptile species. Humans have a pretty good track record of making friends with things that could theoretically eat us. Theoretically? Kixmoth chimed. Okay, practically. But that's beside the point. Professor Grimbach activated another section of the holographic display showing a star chart. As it happens, Miss Hunt, your unique perspective, may have an opportunity for practical application. Next week's field expedition will take us to Verdania, a planet recently cleared for xenobiological study. The local fauna has been classified as entirely benign. Benign how? Val asked, suddenly more interested. No predator species above Class 2, no toxic or aggressive plant life, no environmental hazards beyond standard atmospheric variance. It's considered the perfect location for beginning students to gain field experience without risk. Val's grin widened, and Professor Grimbach felt that headache intensify. Sounds boring. Boring, the professor replied firmly, is exactly what we want in educational environments. Boring keeps students alive long enough to graduate. If you say so, Professor. As the lecture continued with detailed discussions of proper field protocols, safety equipment, and emergency procedures, Val found herself staring at the holographic image of the Fang cub that still rotated slowly above the professor's desk. Those amber eyes seemed almost lonely. She made a mental note to pack extra snacks for the field trip, just in case. Verdania turned out to be exactly as advertised, aggressively boring. The planet's surface stretched out in rolling hills of pale green vegetation that looked like someone had taken earthgrass and drained all the personality out of it. The sky was a forgettable shade of blue-gray, and the most exciting geological feature within scanning range was a rock formation that might charitably be described as slightly pointy. Professor Grimbach surveyed the landing site with the satisfaction of an educator who had successfully chosen the most tediously safe location in the known galaxy. Perfect, he announced, his scaled hide gleaming in the wan sunlight. Absolutely, magnificently mundane. Val stood at the shuttle's cargo ramp, watching her classmates unload enough scientific equipment to stock a small research station. Kixmoth's crystalline form caught the light as they carefully positioned atmospheric sensors, while Hextar scuttled about with her 4 arms, organizing specimen containers with mechanical precision. Nullbecks floated nearby in their environmental suit, occasionally offering gaseous commentary on the setup process. You know, Val said conversationally, for a planet with no dangerous fauna, you guys sure brought a lot of defensive equipment. Standard procedure, Professor Grimbach replied, not looking up from his portable shield generator. The first rule of xenobiology is that there's no such thing as being too prepared. And the second rule? Assume everything wants to kill you until proven otherwise. Val watched Hextar activate what appeared to be a motion detection grid that could have defended a small military base. What's the third rule? There is no third rule. The first 2 cover most situations. The equipment setup continued with the methodical thoroughness of beings who had clearly read too many cautionary tales about underestimating alien environments, force field perimeters, automated defense turrets, emergency beacon transmitters, and enough backup power cells to run a small city, all to study a planet whose most dangerous inhabitant was reportedly a type of moss that grew slightly faster than average. I'm going to take a look around, Val announced, shouldering her collection pack. Stay within the perimeter, Grimbach called after her, and maintain comm contact at all times. Sure thing, Professor. Val wandered beyond the immediate landing zone, following what might have been an animal trail through the unremarkable vegetation. The boring grass gave way to boring shrubs, which eventually yielded to a boring forest of trees that looked like they'd been designed by a committee with no imagination. It was, she reflected, exactly the kind of place where something interesting was bound to happen. The sound reached her before the sight, a low, mournful whining that seemed to emanate from somewhere deeper in the forest. It was the kind of sound that spoke of loneliness, hunger, and something that might charitably be called distress. Val's steps quickened. She found them in a small clearing where the boring trees had thoughtfully arranged themselves in a rough circle. 6 creatures that definitely didn't belong in anyone's definition of benign local fauna were huddled together near what looked like the remains of a much larger version of themselves. Even in their obvious distress, the creatures were magnificent in a way that made Val's breath catch. Midnight black fur-covered frames that were indeed roughly wolf-sized Though built with the kind of predatory elegance that suggested they could probably catch anything they decided to chase. Their eyes glowed with that distinctive amber fire she remembered from the lecture hollows, and when one of them looked up at her approach, she could see teeth that belonged in a horror movie. They were also, quite obviously, babies. "Well," Val murmured, dropping into a crouch at the edge of the clearing. "You guys are definitely not on the approved fauna list." The largest of the cubs tilted its head at her voice, ears perking forward in a gesture that was heartbreakingly familiar despite the creature's alien origin. Its siblings pressed closer to what were clearly the remains of their parent, a massive creature whose size suggested that the lecture holograms had been conservative in their estimates. "Hey there," Val said softly, extending one hand palm up. "Rough day, huh?" The largest cub took a tentative step toward her, then stopped, torn between curiosity and caution. Its nose twitched as it tested her scent, and Val could practically see the debate playing out behind those intelligent amber eyes. I know," she continued in the same gentle tone she'd used with frightened animals since childhood. "Strange new creature. Could be dangerous. But you know what? You could probably eat me for a light snack, so I think we're even on the danger front." One of the smaller cubs made a soft, chittering sound that somehow managed to convey both hope and desperation. It was the kind of sound that bypassed rational thought and went straight to the part of human psychology that had been taking in strays since the species figured out fire. "Oh, you guys are killing me here," Val said, settling cross-legged in the grass. "Come on, I've got ration bars. They taste like recycled cardboard, but they're technically nutritious." She pulled a protein bar from her pack and broke off a small piece, tossing it toward the cubs. The largest one sniffed it carefully, then nibbled at it with the delicate precision of something that was very, very hungry, but trying to maintain dignity. The taste must have passed inspection, because within moments all 6 cubs were crowding around her, their previous caution overcome by the pressing needs of empty stomachs and the desperate hope for kindness from any source. "There we go," Val murmured, distributing pieces of ration bar with the practiced efficiency of someone who had clearly done this before. "Not so scary after all, are you? Just hungry kids a long way from home." The largest cub finished its portion and looked up at her with an expression that managed to combine gratitude, hope, and a question that didn't need translation. "Are you going to help us?" "Yeah," Val said, reaching out to gently scratch behind its ears. "I think I can work something out." The cub leaned into her touch, and she felt the rumble of something that might have been purring if it hadn't been coming from a creature that could theoretically bite through starship armor. That was when the screaming started. The sound echoed through the forest from the direction of the landing site, a mixture of academic terror and mechanical alarms that suggested the benign planet had decided to live up to the second rule of xenobiology. "Stay here," Val told the cubs, which was probably the most pointless instruction she'd ever given. She activated her comm unit as she sprinted back through the forest. "Prof, what's your status?" "Miss Hunt! Where are you? The local flora has suddenly developed aggressive tendencies, and we're under attack by what appears to be mobile crystal formations." "Mobile what now?" "Large, sharp, and apparently irritated by our presence. The defensive perimeter is holding, but we need immediate evacuation." Val burst from the tree line to see a scene that would have been hilarious if it weren't so dangerous. The supposedly benign Verdanian landscape had transformed into something resembling a mineral-based war zone. Formations of crystal that rose from the ground, like geometric flowers, were spinning and hurling projectiles at the research team's defensive barriers, while the grass itself seemed to be writhing with predatory intent. Her classmates huddled behind the force field perimeter, which sparked and flashed under the bombardment. Kixmoth's crystalline body was pulsing with stress patterns. Nulbeck's had compressed into an anxious sphere, and Hextar was frantically working on what looked like emergency communication equipment. "Val!" Professor Grimbach shouted when he spotted her. "Get inside the perimeter! The local ecosystem has gone completely hostile." "Any idea why?" she called back, dodging a chunk of crystal that embedded itself in a tree beside her head. "Unknown, possibly territorial response to our presence." A low growl from behind her made everyone freeze. Val turned to see all 6 cubs padding out of the forest, their amber eyes reflecting the light from the defense barriers. They moved with the fluid grace of born predators, and even in their obvious youth, they were clearly nothing that belonged on a planet classified as benign. "Miss Hunt," Professor Grimbach said in the careful tone of someone trying not to provoke something with very large teeth, "please tell me those are not what I think they are." "That depends," Val replied, as the largest cub moved to stand beside her, its hackles raised at the attacking crystal formations. "What do you think they are?" "Fang cubs, on a planet that was supposed to be completely safe." "Then yeah, they're exactly what you think they are." The cubs spread out in a loose formation, their attention fixed on the hostile landscape rather than the cowering research team. Their body language spoke of creatures that had seen this kind of thing before and knew exactly how to handle it. "How," Grimbach managed, "are apex predators from Mortis Prime on Verdania?" "I'm guessing they didn't walk here," Val said, watching as the largest cub took a step toward one of the approaching crystal formations. "But right now, I think we've got bigger problems." As if to emphasize her point, a section of the ground near the shuttle erupted upward, revealing something that looked like a cross between a flower and a buzz saw. The cubs responded immediately, their mournful whining transforming into something that sounded like battle hymns. "Well," Val said, reaching down to scratch the largest cub behind the ears, "this just got interesting." The cub looked up at her with an expression that might have been a grin, if grins could be made with teeth designed for rending starship hulls. "Interesting" was about to become a significant understatement. The crystal formation that erupted from the ground near the shuttle looked like something a particularly vindictive architect might design if tasked with creating the galaxy's most efficient killing machine. Geometric edges caught the light as it spun with mechanical precision, launching shards of razor-sharp mineral in all directions while emitting a sound like grinding metal having an argument with itself. The cubs reacted as one, their bodies flowing from relaxed alertness to combat readiness in a heartbeat. The largest cub placed itself directly between Val and the spinning death flower, while its siblings spread out in a formation that spoke of practiced coordination. "Fascinating tactical behavior," Hextar observed from behind the force field, her scientific training apparently overriding her sense of self-preservation. "They're implementing a protective formation around the human." "They're implementing a protective formation around their new food source," Professor Grimbach corrected grimly. "Miss Hunt, please retreat to the perimeter immediately." "Can't do that, Prof," Val called back, watching as more crystal formations began sprouting from the ground like the galaxy's most unwelcome garden. "These guys need help, and your force field won't hold forever." As if to emphasize her point, the defensive barrier sparked and flickered under renewed bombardment. Kixmoth's crystalline form was resonating with stress harmonics that made everyone's teeth ache. "The power cells are depleting faster than calculated," Nulbeck's announced, their gaseous forms swirling with agitation. At current consumption rates, we have perhaps 20 minutes before complete barrier failure." The largest cub looked back at Val, and she could have sworn she saw calculation in those amber eyes. It made a sound that was half growl, half whine, then jerked its head toward the attacking crystal formations in a gesture that needed no translation. "Stay behind me." "I don't think so, big guy," Val said, pulling her collection pack around to her front and rummaging through its contents. "This is a team effort." She found what she was looking for: a small geological hammer designed for collecting mineral samples. It was hardly military-grade equipment, but it was solid metal and had a satisfying weight to it. "Miss Hunt," Professor Grimbach's voice cracked with academic horror, "you cannot seriously be considering combat with apex predators as allies." "Why not?" Val replied, testing the hammer's balance. "They seem to know what they're doing." One of the smaller cubs had circled around to flank a crystal formation, moving with liquid grace despite the chaos erupting around them. As Val watched, it launched itself at the geometric nightmare, jaws clamping down on what might have been the creature's equivalent of a neck. The crystal formation's spinning slowed, then stopped entirely, as the cub worried at it with the persistence of something that had been bred for exactly this kind of work. "Incredible," Hextar breathed. "They're targeting structural weak points. These creatures have encountered crystal-based predators before." "Which raises the question," Grimbach said, his academic curiosity warring with his survival instincts, "of why fang cubs from Mortis Prime know how to fight Verdanian crystal formations." The answer came from an unexpected source, as the cubs continued their coordinated assault on the hostile landscape. The ground beneath the research team's feet began to vibrate with a low, thrumming sound that seemed to come from deep within the planet itself. "Subsurface activity," Nullbex announced, their form condensing into an anxious knot. "Something large is moving underground." The vibration intensified, and suddenly the pieces of the puzzle clicked into place in Val's mind, with the clarity of someone who had spent too much time watching nature documentaries. "They're not from Mortis Prime," she said, dodging a crystal shard that whistled past her ear. "They're refugees." "What?" Grimbach called back. "The cubs. They're not supposed to be here either. Something happened to their pack, and they ended up stranded on Verdania." She gestured at the chaos around them. "The local ecosystem doesn't like visitors." As if to confirm her theory, the ground split open near the shuttle, revealing something that made the crystal formations look like friendly house pets. The creature that emerged was roughly the size of a small building and appeared to be constructed entirely of living mineral. Geometric patterns pulsed along its surface with bioluminescent malevolence, and when it opened what might charitably be called a mouth, the sound that emerged was like tectonic plates having a disagreement. "Crystal harvester," the largest cub beside her growled, though how she understood the meaning of the sound was something she'd worry about later. "Yeah," Val replied, hefting her geological hammer. "I can see that." The harvester's attention fixed on the cubs, with the kind of predatory focus that suggested this was personal. Around the clearing, the smaller crystal formations ceased their attacks on the research team and began converging on the cubs instead. "Oh," Professor Grimbach said, with the tone of someone experiencing a paradigm shift in real time. "Oh dear." "What?" Kixmoth chimed urgently. "They're not attacking us. They never were attacking us." Grimbach's scaled hide had gone pale. "They're hunting the cubs. We're just collateral damage." The largest cub looked up at Val with an expression that managed to convey both apology and determination. It was the look of something that had seen its family killed and was prepared to go down fighting rather than let it happen again. "Like hell," Val said. She vaulted over a low crystal formation, landing beside the cub just as the harvester launched itself forward with surprising speed for something made of living rock. The geological hammer in her hand suddenly felt woefully inadequate, but it was what she had. "New plan!" she shouted to her classmates. "Everyone with a scanner or multi-tool, target the bioluminescent patterns. Those are probably neural clusters." "That's completely theoretical," Hextar protested. "Then let's test the hypothesis." What followed could generously be described as the galaxy's most chaotic impromptu xenobiology field study. Val found herself riding the largest cub like the universe's most dangerous cavalry mount, swinging her hammer at crystal formations while trying not to think about how many safety protocols she was violating. The cubs moved like they had been born for this kind of warfare, which, she reflected, they probably had. Each one seemed to instinctively know where the others were, coordinating their attacks with a precision that would have made military tacticians weep with envy. Behind them, her classmates had overcome their terror enough to contribute to the battle. Hextar's compound eyes tracked multiple targets, while her forearms operated scanning equipment that bathed the crystal creatures in analytical light. Kixmoth's crystalline structure resonated at frequencies that seemed to disrupt the enemy formations, while Nulbeck's had somehow weaponized their environmental suit's atmospheric processing system. "The neural clusters are disrupted by harmonic interference," Kixmoth announced, their voice creating feedback loops that made nearby crystal formations stumble. "Atmospheric contamination is affecting their mobility," Nulbeck's added, releasing clouds of processed gas that seemed to make the creatures sluggish. Professor Grimbach, meanwhile, had apparently decided that if he was going to die horribly, he might as well get some good research data out of it. He was documenting everything with the methodical precision of someone who had clearly lost his mind, but was determined to be professional about it. The battle reached its crescendo when the massive harvester finally managed to corner two of the smaller cubs. Val could see the terror in their amber eyes as the creature raised what might have been an arm to deliver a finishing blow. Without thinking, she launched herself from the back of her cub companion, geological hammer raised like the universe's most inadequate sword. She landed on the harvester's surface and immediately began attacking the largest cluster of bioluminescent patterns she could find. The creature's roar of pain and surprise was probably audible from orbit. "Val!" the largest cub called, and she realized with a start that she could understand it perfectly. "I'm okay," she called back, continuing to hammer at neural clusters while the creature bucked like a mechanical bull with anger management issues. The harvester's death throes sent shock waves through the ground, causing a chain reaction that brought down the remaining crystal formations like a house of geological cards. Mineral shards rained down around them as the creature's bioluminescent patterns flickered once, twice, then went dark forever. When the dust finally settled, Val found herself sitting in the middle of what looked like a gemstone quarry that had been redecorated by a particularly violent tornado. Crystal fragments sparkled in the wan sunlight, creating a battlefield that was both beautiful and terrifying. The cubs gathered around her, their earlier battle fury replaced by something that looked suspiciously like relief, mixed with exhaustion. The largest one approached slowly, its amber eyes fixed on her face with an intensity that made her breath catch. When it finally reached her, it lowered its massive head and nuzzled her shoulder with surprising gentleness, for something with teeth that could cut through starship armor. "Thank you," it rumbled, and Val realized that somewhere during the battle, her understanding of their communication had shifted from instinctive to actual comprehension. "You can talk," she said, not really surprised anymore. "We always could. You finally learned to listen." The cub's mental voice carried undertones of amusement and sadness. "Your kind sees with more than eyes." The other cubs pressed closer, their own voices joining the mental conversation in a harmonious chorus of gratitude and wonder. Through their shared communication, Val caught glimpses of their story. A merchant vessel attacked by crystal pirates, parents dying to give their offspring time to escape, crash landing on a planet that turned out to be home to the very creatures that had killed their family. "They've been hiding here for weeks," she realized aloud, "trying to survive while the crystal hunters tracked them down." "Miss Hunt?" Professor Grimbach's voice carried a note of concern that suggested he thought the battle might have affected her sanity. "They're telepathic," she explained, gently scratching behind the largest cub's ears. "Not just predators. They're refugees with a functioning social structure, complex emotions, and the ability to form interspecies bonds." Hextar's mandibles clicked rapidly with excitement. "The implications for xenosociology are staggering. Telepathic apex predators with pack-bonding instincts could revolutionize our understanding of predator-prey relationships." "More importantly," Nulbex added, their gaseous form swirling with what might have been embarrassment, "it suggests that our classification systems have been fundamentally flawed." Professor Grimbach lowered the defensive barrier and approached slowly, his academic curiosity clearly warring with several centuries of ingrained caution. "Miss Hunt, are you certain these creatures are safe?" The largest cub turned its attention to the professor, and Grimbach suddenly went very still. After a long moment, his scaled features shifted into an expression of wonder. They're showing me their memories," he whispered. "The attack on their ship, watching their parents die, weeks of hiding and hunger." His voice cracked slightly. "They're just children. Traumatized, orphaned children who happen to be apex predators." "Which explains why they were so protective of Val," Kixmoth observed, their crystalline structure chiming with realization. She represented safety and kindness when they had known only fear and loss. Val looked around at her classmates, all of whom were now staring at the cubs with expressions ranging from wonder to academic excitement to profound guilt. "So," she said cheerfully, "anyone want to revise their theories about dangerous fauna?" "Well," Professor Grimbach said from behind the flickering remains of the defensive barrier, "that was educational." The medical scanner beeped cheerfully as it catalogued the various scratches and bruises Val had acquired during her impromptu career as an interspecies cavalry officer. Professor Grimbach held the device with the careful precision of someone who was still processing the fact that his star student had just survived riding an apex predator into battle. Superficial lacerations, minor contusions, and what appears to be, are those bite marks? He peered at the scanner readout with academic concern. "Affectionate nibbles," Val corrected, wincing slightly as she shifted position. Around her, the 6 cubs had arranged themselves in a protective circle, their amber eyes tracking every movement of the medical equipment as if they suspected it might suddenly turn hostile. "They're still figuring out human durability limits." The largest cub, who had introduced himself through their telepathic link as something that roughly translated to "starfire," rumbled with what sounded suspiciously like laughter. "Your species is surprisingly resilient for something made mostly of water and optimism." "We prefer to think of it as creative problem-solving with inadequate equipment," Val replied, earning a mental chuckle from the entire pack. Professor Grimbach set down the scanner and fixed her with a look that suggested he was reconsidering everything he had ever taught about xenobiology. Miss Hunt, in 30 minutes, you have managed to overturn centuries of established doctrine regarding apex predator behavior, interspecies communication protocols, and basic survival instincts. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? I'm not entirely certain there's a difference anymore. Hextar approached cautiously, her forearms laden with scanning equipment that hummed with analytical enthusiasm. The telepathic communication demonstrates neurological complexity that exceeds most sapient species. Their pack coordination suggests distributed intelligence networks and their tactical adaptability. She paused, mandibles clicking rapidly. We've been classifying them as animals when they're clearly people. Dangerous people, Kixmoth added, their crystalline structure chiming with harmonic emphasis. But people, nonetheless. Nullbecks swirled in their environmental suit, their gaseous form creating patterns that somehow managed to convey embarrassment. The xenobiological community has been operating under fundamentally flawed assumptions. We've been studying predator behavior when we should have been attempting first contact protocols. Val gently scratched behind Starfire's ears, earning a rumble of contentment that vibrated through the ground. The scary part is that this probably isn't unique. How many other dangerous animals are actually misunderstood sapient species? The question hung in the air like an uncomfortable truth that nobody wanted to examine too closely. The bureaucratic implications alone. Professor Grimbach muttered, apparently calculating how many research papers would need to be retracted. Species reclassification, diplomatic protocols, ethical review boards. He trailed off, looking slightly overwhelmed. So, what happens now? Val asked, looking around at the cubs who had somehow become her responsibility. I mean, they can't exactly go back to Mortis Prime. According to their memories, that planet's been strip-mined by the crystal harvesters. Starfire's mental voice carried notes of ancient sadness. Our homeworld is gone. The crystal pirates consume entire ecosystems, leaving nothing but empty rock. We are the last of our pack. Last of your species? Hextar asked gently. Unknown. There may be other survivors scattered across the galaxy, but Starfire's thoughts trailed off with the weight of uncertainty. Val stood up, testing her various injuries, and made the kind of decision that would either get her expelled from the academy or revolutionize interspecies relations. Possibly both. Well, she announced, looks like I'm adopting 6 apex predators. The silence that followed was so complete that even the planet's ambient sounds seemed to hold their breath. I beg your pardon? Professor Grimbach managed. You heard me. They need a pack. I need research subjects for my xenopsychology thesis. And frankly, after today, I'm pretty sure they're better at keeping me alive than any safety protocol the Academy has ever devised. Miss Hunt, Grimbach said carefully, these are not pets. They are sapient beings with complex social needs, territorial instincts, and the ability to reduce most known materials to component atoms. Which is why they're perfect, Val replied cheerfully. Think about it, Professor. First successful interspecies pack bonding with telepathic apex predators. The research applications alone would fund the xenobiology department for decades. Starfire looked up at her with an expression that managed to combine amusement, gratitude, and something that might have been hope. You would claim us as pack family? If you'll have me. Fair warning, though, I'm probably the least qualified pack leader in galactic history. Pack leadership is not about qualification. Another cub, whose name translated roughly to Moon Whisper, added with mental laughter, it is about heart. You have demonstrated heart. Plus, a third cub chimed in, you taste like those nutrition bars. If we get hungry, we know where to find more. The mental equivalent of pack laughter rippled through the group, and Val found herself grinning despite the absurdity of the situation. There are, Professor Grimbach said slowly, going to be forms, mountains of forms, diplomatic paperwork, species reclassification documents, ethical review committees, insurance liability assessments. Don't forget the housing arrangements, Kixmoth added helpfully. Standard academy dormitories are not designed for creatures of their size and dietary requirements. And the socialization protocols, Hextar contributed. Integrating apex predators into academic environments will require careful planning. Nullbex swirled thoughtfully. The other students may require psychological preparation for sharing facilities with creatures they have been taught to fear. Val looked around at her classmates, all of whom were discussing the practical implications of her decision with the kind of academic enthusiasm that suggested they were already mentally writing research proposals. "You know what?" she said to Starfire. "I think this is going to work out just fine." The cub's mental voice carried warmth that had nothing to do with his telepathic abilities. "Your species has a gift for finding family in the most unlikely places." "Yeah," Val agreed, watching Professor Grimbach pull out a communication device to begin what was clearly going to be a very interesting conversation with Academy administration. "We're pretty good at making friends with things that could theoretically eat us." "Theoretically?" Moonwhisper asked with mental amusement. "Okay, practically. But you guys seem more interested in belly rubs than tactical consumption, so I think we're good." The pack's collective laughter rippled through the mental link, carrying with it the warmth of acceptance, the promise of protection, and the beginning of something that no xenobiology textbook had ever bothered to categorize: genuine friendship between species that probably shouldn't have been able to coexist. 3 hours later, Val found herself filling out paperwork that she was reasonably certain had never been designed for her particular situation. The forms section on companion animal registration had been crossed out and replaced with interspecies diplomatic contact declaration, while the space for pet species now read sapient apex predator pack, telepathic. "For the record," Professor Grimbach said, reviewing her paperwork with the expression of someone whose academic career had just taken a hard left turn into uncharted territory, "when I suggested that boring field trips were safer, this was not what I had in mind." "But you have to admit," Val replied, watching Starfire and his pack siblings explore the shuttle's cargo bay with the careful curiosity of creatures learning to trust again. "It's been educational." "Educational," Grimbach repeated slowly. "Yes, I suppose that's one way to describe the complete overthrow of established xenobiological doctrine." "Plus," Val added with the kind of grin that had been getting her into trouble since childhood, "just wait until we get back to campus. I'm pretty sure the academies never had to issue student housing for emotional support apex predators." The shuttle's communication system crackled to life with an incoming transmission from Academy Command. Professor Grimbach's expression suggested he was contemplating the relative merits of immediate retirement versus facing whatever administrative nightmare was about to unfold. "Verdania Research Team, this is Academy Command. We're receiving some unusual reports from your expedition. Please confirm your status and explain why our sensors are detecting 6 unregistered life forms aboard your vessel." Grimbach looked at Val, who was currently engaged in what appeared to be a telepathic conversation with Starfire about optimal seating arrangements for creatures with tails. Miss Hunt, perhaps you would like to explain to Academy Command how we acquired 6 apex predators. Sure thing, Professor. Val activated the comm system with the cheerful confidence of someone who had clearly not thought through the implications of her actions. Academy Command, this is Val Hunt. We've successfully made first contact with a previously unknown sapient species and established diplomatic relations. The silence from the other end of the communication lasted long enough for several small civilizations to rise and fall. Miss Hunt, the voice finally replied, with the careful tone of someone trying very hard not to have a breakdown. Our records indicate that Verdania was classified as uninhabited. Please explain how you encountered a sapient species on an empty planet. Well, technically they weren't supposed to be here either. They're refugees from Mortis Prime, which apparently got strip-mined by crystal pirates. The cubs have been hiding on Verdania, but the local ecosystem turned out to be hostile to visitors. We helped them fight off some mineral-based predators, established telepathic communication, and now they've adopted me as their pack leader. Another pause, this one long enough for the heat death of the universe to become a statistical possibility. Miss Hunt, did you just say that apex predators have adopted you? Other way around, actually. I adopted them. They're orphans. And honestly, after seeing them in action, I think they're probably safer companions than most of the Academy's standard safety equipment. From somewhere in the background of the transmission came what sounded like multiple people having simultaneous nervous breakdowns in different languages. Starfire's mental voice carried amusement as he listened to the conversation. Your administrative hierarchy appears to be experiencing collective distress. Yeah, they do that, Val replied telepathically. Bureaucrats aren't really built for handling paradigm shifts. Perhaps, Moonwhisper suggested with mental laughter, we should demonstrate our peaceful intentions when we arrive. Good idea. Just remember, no showing off the teeth unless absolutely necessary. Humans get nervous about dental displays. The communication system crackled again. Miss Hunt, Academy Command is dispatching a full diplomatic team and several medical personnel. Please maintain your current position and do not, we repeat, do not attempt any further diplomatic initiatives until properly trained personnel can assess the situation. Copy that, Academy Command. Though I should probably mention that the cubs are really looking forward to meeting more humans. Apparently, we're the first species they've encountered that didn't immediately try to kill them or run away screaming. That's actually somewhat encouraging, the voice admitted reluctantly. Please stand by for further instructions. The transmission ended, leaving the shuttle filled with the kind of silence that suggested everyone was contemplating the various ways their lives had just become significantly more complicated. Well, Hextar said brightly, this should certainly make for an interesting research paper. Assuming we survive the Academy's review process, Kixmoth added, their crystalline structure chiming with what might have been nervous laughter. Oh, we'll survive, Val said confidently, settling back against Starfire's side as if giant telepathic predators were perfectly normal furniture. The Academy loves groundbreaking research, and face it, this is about as groundbreaking as it gets. Starfire's mental voice carried warm agreement. Your educational institution sounds fascinating. We look forward to contributing to the advancement of interspecies understanding. Plus, another cub added with telepathic mischief, we are very curious about these dining halls we keep hearing about in your thoughts. Val grinned. Oh, you. Guys are going to love the cafeteria. Fair warning, though, the food's pretty terrible. But there's lots of it. Professor Grimbach closed his eyes and began what sounded suspiciously like a prayer to whatever deity watched over long-suffering educators who had somehow become pioneers in interspecies diplomacy. It was definitely going to be an interesting semester.